Okay, so what have we got for question of the day there, Lawson?
So our question of the day is, what does the Bible say about masturbation?
And we get all kinds of questions here. So let's turn our Bibles to Matthew chapter 5. This is where we're going to start. And while we're turning there, I just do want to say this, and that is that, the whole concept of biblical morality, I've said this before, I'm going to say it again, it is not arbitrary. The principle behind biblical morality is very, very simple. It is simply this, it is do no harm. Mm-hmm. End of story. God never asks us to take something out of our life unless it is something that is going to bring harm to us. Mm-hmm. Now, we may not always see or understand the harm that it's going to bring, but certainly sooner or later, we're going to find out exactly what the problem is. Okay, so let me share with you a passage here in answer to this question in Matthew chapter 5. This is not directly talking about masturbation, but there are other passages that do. It says this, Jesus says, I say to you, verse 27, Matthew 5:27, you have heard that it was said in the old times, you shall not commit adultery. But I say to you that whoever looks on a woman to lust after her has committed adultery with her already in his heart. And so here Jesus raises the issue of lust. Mm-hmm. He then goes on to talk about if your eye sins, cut it out. And where does lust start? It starts with our eyes. It's then significant what he goes on to talk about, because he says if your hand sins, cut it off and throw it from you. Now, Jesus is not talking about self-mutilation here. He's talking about the importance of cutting sin out of our life. And if sin is something that is dragging us down, then we should cut it out of our life. Now, when it comes to the subject of masturbation, there's an allusion to it here. Your eye, your hand, so forth, cut them off, get rid of them if this is something that is causing you a problem and causing you to sin. As we read when we talked about lust before, lust leads to other actions. It's one of those, this is where the Bible says, thou shalt not covet. And covetousness is one of those sins that we often don't think badly about. It's because of what it leads to. When Eve first sinned in the Garden of Eden, her first sin was to covet the fruit. She wanted it. Yeah. It was an illicit desire. Of course, when it comes to the subject of masturbation, lust, coveting is something that is, linked with masturbation right there, fantasizing. The greatest, the largest sexual organ that you have in your body is your brain. Mm-hmm. And this is where, it's where it all starts. Job made this statement over here, and it's a really good statement. He said this, and we need to be careful reading these, because sometimes people get the problem, they say like, oh wow, if I see a beautiful woman, I've sinned. No, you haven't sinned if you've seen a beautiful woman. It's when you start to, and I'm talking to men here, it's when you start to mentally undress that woman that it becomes a problem. Mm-hmm. He says, I've made a covenant with my eyes. Why should I then look at a maid or a young girl? Mm-hmm. It's like, don't be a pervert. We don't need to be perverts.
Yeah, true.
This is not something that's appropriate. If you go over to the book of Ezekiel, because of course this is something, the two verses that we've just read are addressed towards men. Here's one that is addressed towards women and specifically deals with this subject. And down in, verse 17, it says, you have taken your fair jewels of my gold and my silver, which I gave you, and made yourself images of men and committed whoredom or prostitution with them. So, you don't have to have too much of an imagination to see what God is condemning in this particular passage right here. Okay, so the question is, what harm does it do? Well, modern science has shown that it actually does a lot of harm. And anything that God pronounces as being particularly good is something that Satan is going to... The better something is, the more Satan will fight against it, which just goes to show how good a thing sex is. Mm-hmm. Because Satan is working so hard to destroy it.
Yeah, for sure.
And of course, when you have sex with a partner, it releases all kinds of good chemicals into your body. When you have sex without a partner, you get an imbalance in those chemicals that creates, very similar to drug abuse. It creates damage in the brain, and that's been well documented, in recent times. And I've got some info on Facebook about it.